It was a Tuesday morning like any other, or at least that's what I thought when I stepped outside my house. The crisp air hit my face, and I felt the usual peace of my suburban neighborhood wash over me. But as I reached the driveway, something was wrong. A massive construction vehicle was blocking my way, its orange warning lights flashing ominously. I froze, staring at the machine that had no business being there. The HOA. Again. The same group that had made it their mission to control every little detail of our lives. And now they were making their presence known in a new way, by blocking my driveway. I could feel the familiar knot of frustration tighten in my chest. For months they had been nitpicking every little thing, from the color of my mailbox to the type of fence I had in my backyard. Now they were escalating things. They thought they could bully me like they had done with so many others in the neighborhood. But this time, they were wrong. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just another resident at their mercy. I wasn't powerless. The street they were trying to control, it was mine. All of it. I had just returned from the store, bags in hand, when I noticed it. A bright orange envelope pinned to my door. My stomach sank, the familiar dread creeping up my spine as I walked closer. The HOA's logo stared back at me, a symbol of petty control that had haunted our neighborhood for years. I pulled the envelope free and ripped it open, already bracing myself for the usual barrage of complaints. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a fine, citing my illegal driveway. Illegal? My driveway had been in place for years without any issue, yet now, out of nowhere, they decided to target it. The nerve. I stood there, stunned, holding the letter in my hands. Anger surged through me, but so did confusion. How could they possibly justify this? What did they want from me this time? A wave of frustration hit me like a ton of bricks. I could feel the urge to call it quits, to ignore the notice and move on. It would have been so easy. But then, something deep inside me stirred. A quiet reminder of the bigger picture I had hidden from view for too long. What they didn't know, what they could never know, was that this driveway sat on a street I owned. All of it. Every inch of the asphalt, every house that lined the block, the streets, the homes, the land, they were mine. I had bought the entire neighborhood years ago, a decision made in the quietest of ways, well before the HOA had ever been formed. The letter in my hand, the fines and the threats, they were just the beginning. They had no idea who they were messing with. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and mounting frustration. The HOA was relentless, sending notice after notice, demanding fines for the slightest infraction. My mailbox was too high, my fence too short. It didn't matter how small the issue was. They were determined to control every aspect of my life. I felt like I was being suffocated, cornered by their power, but I knew I had to respond. I couldn't let them continue to walk all over me. This wasn't just about a driveway or some minor inconvenience anymore. I was starting to see the larger picture. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance. It was a symbol of an oppressive system that thought it could control everything, and I had the power to fight back. The first thing I did was head straight to City Hall. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I was angry, but I needed facts. Armed with a sense of purpose, I pulled up the property records, my fingers trembling slightly as I searched. What I found made my heart race. Every single parcel of land on this street, from the sidewalks to the houses, was under my name. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been the owner of the entire street for years, but I had kept it hidden, never needing to reveal it, never needing to take control. I stared at the records, stunned by the truth. The street was mine. The entire street. Every house. Every inch of asphalt. And even the HOA offices. They were on land that I controlled. I didn't need to play by their rules. I didn't need to follow their demands. I had the legal right to do whatever I wanted. But as much as the revelation empowered me, it also made me hesitate. Should I reveal my power now? Should I walk into that HOA meeting and show them the deed, exposing my ownership? Part of me wanted to march right into their office, slap the paperwork on the table and watch their faces fall. But there was something holding me back, a fear that if I revealed my control too soon, it might escalate things in a way I wasn't prepared for. The internal conflict raged on. I needed a plan, something bigger than just winning a petty fight with a group of overzealous homeowners. I wasn't just fighting for my driveway anymore. This was about exposing the cracks in the system, showing the community that they didn't need to live under the thumb of the HOA. I kept digging. Late into the night, I pulled up old records, digging into the HOA's history. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep the corruption ran. The HOA had been taking advantage of residents for years, imposing ridiculous fines and dictating every little detail of their lives. They had bullied people into submission, profiting off of fear and control, but no one had ever fought back. That was about to change. The deeper I went into the HOA's shady dealings, the clearer it became. I wasn't just an ordinary resident. I was the one who could take them down. But first, I had to decide whether to show them my hand or keep my power hidden a little longer. The day of the HOA meeting arrived like a storm on the horizon, and I could feel the tension building in my chest. I wasn't sure how things would go, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be like any other meeting. The same faces would be there, the same smug expressions, but this time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. This time, I had the upper hand. As I walked into the conference room, I was met with the usual cold stares and whispered remarks. The HOA president, Karen, sat at the head of the table, her expression condescending as always. I could feel her eyes narrow as she saw me walk in, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her posture screamed that she already considered herself in control. "Ah, it's you," Karen said with a thin smile, her voice dripping with arrogance. "I trust you've come to accept our terms. We don't tolerate violations of our rules, you know." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. This was it, the moment where everything would change. "Actually," I said, my voice steady but carrying a quiet intensity, "I'm here to inform you that you have been violating the rules of the land." Her eyebrows shot up, but she didn't interrupt me. The other members of the HOA exchanged curious glances, but none of them seemed to grasp what was coming. I set down a thick stack of papers on the table. Karen's eyes flickered to them, then back to me, her smile still intact but less confident. I could see the shift. In her posture, she was starting to get uneasy. I pulled out the top document, the deed, and slid it across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, a hint of annoyance in her tone. "That," I said, pointing to the deed, "is the proof that I own every inch of this street, the entire neighborhood, all of it, the houses, the land, the roads. It's mine." There was a moment of stunned silence. No one spoke. Karen's smug smile had completely disappeared. Her face paled as she glanced down at the document, then back at me, clearly trying to process what I had just said. This can't be right," Karen stammered. "You can't own the street. That's impossible." I remained calm, watching the realization begin to settle in. The shock was evident on every face around the table. "You see," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "when you started throwing fines and threatening my property, you didn't do your homework. You didn't know who you were dealing with. I'm not just a resident here, I'm the resident, the one who owns the land under your feet, and everything you've been doing, it's been built on a lie." The room was still. The other HOA members looked around, unsure of how to respond. The confidence they'd walked in with was gone, replaced by unease. Karen, who had always been the one to hold power in this room, now looked like she was trying to salvage what little control she had left. She cleared her throat, but her voice shook when she spoke again. "You're bluffing. This isn't real. You can't just come in here and—" "I'm not bluffing," I cut her off, my words sharp. "This isn't a game. You've been bullying residents, taking advantage of their fear. But you've crossed the wrong person, and now you're going to have to answer for it." Karen's eyes darted between the deed and my face, her composure cracking. I could see the walls she'd built around herself begin to crumble. She was losing control, and it was beautiful to watch. The reign of terror she'd built on this HOA was about to end, and she knew it. I turned my gaze to the rest of the room, making sure they understood the magnitude of what was happening. "You see, this street was never yours to control. You may have thought you held power, but in reality you were nothing but a puppet. The real power was in my hands all along, and now I'm taking it back. I felt a rush of satisfaction as the truth sank in. The fear, the intimidation tactics, the fines, all of it had been meaningless. The HOA was hollow. It was a construct of people who believed they had power, but they didn't. Not anymore. Karen's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and desperation. You can't just tear everything down. I'm not tearing anything down, I interrupted, my voice cold. I'm rebuilding it, the right way, the way it was supposed to be. You're done here, Karen. The HOA is over. I could see it in her eyes. The defeat. The moment when someone realizes that their entire world is crumbling around them and they have no way to stop it. The power had shifted, and in that moment, the HOA was no longer the one in charge. The court proceedings were swift, and to my surprise, they didn't drag on as long as I had anticipated. The evidence was irrefutable, and the truth of my ownership was laid bare for all to see. Karen and the rest of the HOA board tried to fight it, of course, but their attempts to discredit me only exposed the cracks in their facade. They had been living in a bubble of power, built on intimidation and manipulation. And now that bubble had burst. When the judge finally delivered the ruling in my favor, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The HOA was officially dissolved. The rules they had imposed, the fines they had levied, they were all deemed illegal. Their power stripped away in an instant. The community that had long suffered under their oppressive control now had the freedom to live their lives without fear of constant surveillance and harassment. But as I stood there, I realized it wasn't just about the victory in court. It wasn't just about taking down Karen and her cronies. It was about something deeper. The people in this neighborhood, they had been afraid for so long. Afraid to speak up, afraid to fight back, afraid of the consequences. They had been living in a world where their rights were constantly undermined, but that was over now. The true victory was in the change I had helped bring about. I wasn't just fighting for my own property anymore. I was fighting for every resident who had ever been silenced, for every person who had been bullied into compliance. The real triumph was the strength I had found in myself, the courage to stand up and expose the truth. It had been a long road, and there had been moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if it was worth it. But now, looking at the aftermath, I knew it had all been worth it. Karen, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of her actions. The community rallied behind me, and the backlash against the HOA was swift. Members of the board were forced to resign, and several lawsuits were filed against them for their unethical practices. Karen, in particular, found herself at the center of a storm. She had never imagined a world where she could lose control, but that world had arrived, and it was crushing her. As I walked through the neighborhood in the days that followed, I couldn't help but smile. The air felt different now. There was a sense of freedom that hadn't been there before, a weight lifted from everyone's shoulders. My street, my neighborhood, it was mine, yes, but more importantly, it was ours. The people here had their voices back, and together we would rebuild the community in a way that was fair, just, and free from fear. I had learned something through this entire ordeal. I had learned the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. I had learned that one person's voice could make a difference, that courage could overcome even the most entrenched systems of power. And, most importantly, I had learned that the strength to fight comes not from the fear of losing, but from the hope of winning. Not just for yourself, but for others too. The fight was over. And as I looked around, I knew that this was just the beginning. As I walked through the neighborhood, now free from the HOA's grip, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The houses, once shackled by the overbearing rules of the HOA, stood proudly, each one reflecting the freedom of its inhabitants. The streets, the sidewalks, the very air, it all felt different, lighter. There was no fear of retribution anymore, no anxiety about the next fine or threat. People were starting to come out of their homes, their faces filled with relief and even joy. Conversations sparked up between neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and we were finally free to be ourselves. I had changed through this journey. I had learned that standing up for what's right wasn't just about personal victories. It was about the courage to challenge a system that tries to control, to silence, to crush. In the process, I discovered something far more valuable than the ownership of a street. I discovered my own strength. I learned that true power doesn't lie in dominance, in controlling others. It lies in standing firm in your beliefs, even when it feels like the world is against you. The street was mine, yes, but the victory was for everyone. As I walked past the houses that had once been oppressed, I realized that this wasn't just about a fight I had won for myself. It was about the fight I had won for all of us. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, I knew that the fight for justice had only just begun.